So I want to start this week with a few bookkeeping issues. I extended the deadline on your reading response questions twice this week because of problems accessing the readings since the book was not in, and because of some confusion about the schedule of things. As far as the book goes, I posted last week's readings. You should be able to access all of them. You should be getting the book this week, assuming that you ordered it. And as for the syllabus, the schedule of things, look back over the syllabus, look at the introductory video I posted. I lay out how a week should go. This week's schedule is different because of the problems by the book, but from now on, the general structure of things will be that on Mondays, by noon is my goal, I will have that week's video posted. On Wednesday morning, by noon at least, I'll post that week's reading response question, and you have until Friday at 5 p.m. to post your answer on the discussion board. After that, you have the opportunity to discuss each other's posts, etc. for participation grades. Now, unless I say otherwise, that's going to be the structure of each given week. There's some responsibility on you to make sure that you structure things in a way that works. So do it however works for you, using those as mile markers throughout the week. But one idea would be to do the readings over the weekend, watch the video on Monday, go back to the readings, prepare for the question posted on Wednesday, so you'll be able to respond to that question in time to post by Friday at 5 p.m. If there are any questions about this, if you have any problems still getting the book, let me know, please. But I'm going to work on the assumption that everyone has the book or will have the book very soon and can do this week's readings. So last week, the readings, the video discussion might have seemed a bit esoteric. That is, we're doing some sort of philosophy for the sake of doing philosophy. May not seem to be that connected to anything other than philosophy of mind. But in reality, we start studying Descartes because the contemporary conception of mind and its relationship to body either comes from Descartes or comes from responses to Descartes and responses to those responses. We start a sort of dialectic about the mind with Descartes, and this impacts things other than philosophy of mind. Particularly, it impacts the scientific study of mind. Depending on what we take to be the nature of mind and its relationship to body, we're going to have to adjust our study of the mind. If we take that the mind is nothing but the body, then our scientific methods of studying the body allow us to study the mind. If we think that the mind is something other than the body, but there's a certain sort of relationship between the mind and body, then again, that allows us to adjust our science, our study of the mind accordingly. Now, one possibility here that we'll see mentioned often is the idea of reduction, that mental events, the mind reduced to the body. So if I could give a complete account of the body, I have given a complete account of the mind. If that's what we take to be mind and its relationship to body, then that says something very specific about the science of studying mind, that is, study body. Maybe it's complicated, the relationship between mind and body, the reductive base, the physical thing that underlies the mental thing. Maybe that's very complicated. But still, we have prospects of finding that out through our physical sciences. Now, when we're looking at philosophy of mind, we're concerned not just with the nature of mind, but how to go about figuring out the nature of mind. So we have to look at the ontology of mind. Ontology is one of the divisions of metaphysics. It concerns the nature of being. So when we say that the mind is a physical thing, or the mind is an immaterial, non-physical thing, we're making an ontological claim. We're talking about its nature. Metaphysics is also concerned with cosmology, which has to do with causation. So when we talk about mind-body causation, again, we're making metaphysical claims. But beyond the ontological claims, there are also the epistemology, the epistemological claims, the way we go about knowing things. How do we go about knowing the mind? And now we could get Well, there are four possible positions here when we think about answers to an ontological question of the nature of mind and answers to the epistemological question of how we go about knowing the nature of mind. Last week we saw in Descartes that he says to the ontological question, mind is something categorically different than body. That's an ontological claim. In addition, he makes an epistemological claim. The way we go about studying mind is by studying mind directly. We sit down and we think about mind. So there is such a thing as mind, different than body, and we go about studying that mind by studying the mind. There are three other positions available. We could say that there is a mind that is categorically different from body. Nonetheless, we should go about studying that mind by studying the body. We could say that there's not anything categorically different about mind. It just is body. And we should go about studying the mind as a body by studying the body, by using, say, the physical sciences, the biological sciences. Final position is to say that there is nothing categorically different about the mind. It just is a body. Nonetheless, we ought to go about studying the mind mentally by considering it as a mental thing separate from the way we study physical things. Some of these positions may seem strange to you, and I actually think in reflection, once you look more at it, the ones that seem strange are not actually the ones that are strange. The ones that seem more intuitive may be the ones that are stranger in the sense that they have bigger problems facing them. Okay. So I'll start the discussion of this week's readings with an example. So everyone here is enrolled in the course. So how did you go about becoming enrolled in the course? Assuming there are no uncaused events, something caused you to be enrolled in the course. Now maybe some of you were enrolled by mistake. There was a computer glitch. You were forced into it by an advisor. But some of you, I take, went through a process something like sitting down in front of the computer, deciding to reach for the keyboard, pull up the website, type in your Lander ID and use and password, roll in the course. These are physical activities, and I take it that there was something mental going on at the same time or prior to. Even prior to that whole process, you may have deliberated and thought, what class do I want to take? What classes meet my requirements? What classes would I enjoy? Lots of the terms I'm here using are intentional. They're mental. They're about something. They're not clearly physical things. The desire to take the course. Desire seems not to be located at a place. Maybe we think of it as located in the head, in the brain, but it's not more obviously behind my left eye than my right eye. It's not clear that it has an extension. Now, if you did go through a process like this, there were seemingly mental events, thoughts you had that caused physical events, reaching for the keyboard and typing, which again caused mental events like, now I know that I'm enrolled in the course. It seems, on reflection, that there is something mental that is not obviously physical, and that this causes changes in the physical, namely our body, which in turn causes changes in the mental. And there's mental on mental causation. Certain thoughts I have cause other thoughts. I would like to take this course, therefore I'm going to take this course. Reaching for the keyboard, typing causes physical changes. A physical activity causes a sensation on my fingertips of typing. So we have causation all over the place. Mental, physical causation, mental causation, physical causation, physical mental causation. It seems that all of these exist. If we say that the mental is something different than the physical, now there's something of a problem, the problem of causal interaction, which faced Descartes. It seems fairly intuitive that mental activities could cause mental effects because they're of the same sort. Maybe that's a little more difficult to understand than physical causation. I reach for the keyboard, that causes sensations. Well, sensations are not themselves mental. are not themselves physical, so that's complicated itself. But we understand physical causation. The things that are problematic seem to be the mental-physical causation, the physical-mental causation, and maybe the mental-mental causation. Now, this is a huge problem for Descartes because he defines the mental as unextended and immaterial, whereas the physical is extended and material. We understand how something material could affect something else material. It's not so clear how something immaterial could affect something material. In fact, it seems impossible. That's the causal interaction problem. Now, there are other possibilities. We saw last time the idea of supervenience, that changes in mental states depend on changes in physical states. If that's our account of mental-physical causation, then maybe we can use our physical sciences to study the mind. Another term you're going to see often, we saw it last week and this week, is epiphenomenalism. Epiphenomenalism says that the mind, our mental properties, are epiphenomena. Epiphenomena are something like side effects that are not causal. So the mental effects that occur with a physical action are sort of side effects of that physical action and are not themselves causal. It might appear that they're causal. I think I'm going to enroll in this course and that causes me to do something. But really, all the causation was occurring at the physical level. All of the mental activities were only a reflection of what was going on in some sort of indirect way at the physical level. So an example, if I want to come here and fix my hair, I look in the reflection. The reflection does not cause any change in me. I cause a change in the reflection by moving, repositioning my hair. That changes the reflection. The reflection does not change me. Now I might think, well, I saw that my hair was messy. The reflection had messy hair. That caused me to do something. But no, that doesn't cause me to do anything. It is my body, the things that go on in my body, that affect the appearance there. This is the claim of epiphenomenalism. The reflection is an epiphenomena. It's not causal. All the causation is going on in me. That's an effect caused by what's going on in the physical causation. Similarly, shadows are epiphenomena. I can affect by moving my shadow, but the shadow cannot affect me. Certainly not physically. Right? So if you want to know about me, to get back to implications for science, you could go about studying me by looking at my shadow. This is not going to be a great method. Right? It's going to be complicated. You're not going to learn much about me, and anything you could learn about me is going to be more complicated, it seems, than actually studying me. So part of our concerns this week are about the method of going about studying something about the mind. We want to have methods that are possible. Obviously, we want to have the best methods. I could measure the distance between the Earth and the Moon using a ruler, but this is a really bad method. So some of the claims we have this week in the readings are about the method we ought to use to go about studying the mind, not just the epistemological claim of what is possible or how we go about knowing, but what is the best way to go about knowing. Now, the first reading from Gilbert Ryle says that, well, look, it's not the case that there are mind and body as two separate things. He's not a dualist, and he's not even a property dualist. He doesn't say that, well, the property dualist made the move, remember, to get away from the causal interaction problem by saying, well, there are not two different kinds of substances. Mind is not a different kind of thing than body. Rather, there is only body. It's the only kind of thing there is, physical things. But these physical things have different properties. They have mental properties and they have physical properties. The mental properties are reducible to the physical properties, possibly. So the claim it was made in the reading last week that no, you could describe all of the physical properties and not describe all of the mental properties. So they're not reducible. But they are epiphenomena, possibly. Or possibly these mental properties are themselves causal. They do really cause changes in the physical. Ryle says all of this talk is wrong, that it's a category mistake to even conceive of thoughts as mental properties and mental properties as different from physical properties is to make a mistake about the category of thought. So an example of a category mistake is a famous example that you go to visit a university you want to attend, someone shows you around, they show you where all the buildings are, they show you where the parking is, they take you to classes, they show you the way courses run. At the end of the tour, they say, how did you like the tour? And you say, well, I like the campus very much, the buildings are nice, that class was enjoyable, but when am I going to see the university? Well, this is a category mistake because it thinks that the university is something different than all the things you saw. But really all the university is the collection of all of those things, right? With additional things folded in. There are not two different categories of things there. This is Ryle's position. He says, well, look, mental properties may be different from physical properties, but they're not distinct. They're not different kinds of things. And to think of them that way is a mistake, right? So he takes the monist position to the ontological question. There's only one kind of thing. There's only body. Mind just is body. Moreover, epistemologically, the way we go about knowing it, he says that we ought to just study body. Part of the reason for this is that this whole mental talk causes us a confusion. It's pernicious. It makes us think that there is a ghost in the machine, that there's something immaterial. There's this screwy, weird, queer sort of place, my mind, where things are located, but my mind is immaterial and unextended, so how could it be a place at all? Confusions ensue. Now, he does grant that mental properties are very complicated. Maybe that leads us to falling into this trap of talking about the ghost in the machine, talking about the mental as if they're categorically different than the physical. But the fact that they're complicated does not mean that they're not physical. Weather is complicated. No one can tell me exactly what the weather later today is going to be, but no one from that says, well, weather is something spooky and immaterial. No, they say it's a physical phenomenon that's incredibly complicated. We don't currently know how to accurately 100% predict weather later today, let alone weather in another country, given what happens here. Nonetheless, we think there is a physical explanation. It's just too complicated for our science right now. This is something like what Ryle is saying. He's saying that the mind just is the body, mental events just are body events, mental properties just are physical body properties of a complicated sort. He says that, well, the type of property that mental properties are dispositional properties. Some properties are had by a thing at all times, across time, until some change happens to them. Certain things have a certain shape. That is a property that's true of them and is always exhibited by them. Other properties are had and expressed only at certain times under certain conditions. Now, a glass vase is fragile. What does that mean? That does not mean at any given time it is broken. It may never be broken. What it means is that it has a property that says something like, if this glass vase is struck soundly by a hard object, then it will shatter. It has a property. The property is stated by an if-then. If something happens, then something else will occur. We don't always think of these as properties. We look at the table, we say that table has a certain shape. We see it. That property is there in it now. There are other properties I can't see. The property of being flammable. If I were to put fire to it, it would catch on fire. That's a property it has right here, right now, whether it's on fire or not. It's a property it has when it is on fire. It's a property it has if it never catches on fire. These are the nature of mental properties. Okay. If I am angry at you, that may not mean anything about me physically right here, right now, as far as you can observe. But it is a dispositional property such that if I could get away with talking bad about you behind your back and it would make me feel better, then I would do it. Now that's not anger, because anger can be expressed in many other ways. Rather, that's only one of the clauses, the dispositional clauses. If X happens, then Y happens. Now the X and Y for the base case, for the fire case, were simple. But of course they're not really that simple at all. If the vase is hit by a baseball bat with a certain degree of strength at a certain speed, then it shatters into such and such pieces, or to such and such plus one piece. Or if a hard ball were thrown at the vase and struck it at a certain angle, then it would shatter into such and such pieces. If it fell to the floor and the floor were of such and such kind. Now, what we see here is that the X and the Y are really likely infinite collections of situations in the world and results. This is the sort of nature of the mind. I'm angry at you, that might mean if I can get away with bad-mouthing you behind your back and that would make me feel better, then I will bad-mouth you behind your back. It might mean that if I could attack you and hurt you without retribution, then I would do that. It might mean many, many other things. But the mental property of having a mind, of mental activities, mental thoughts, are themselves cashed out in this way. They're properties, and not just the way I said, but really we can express the X and the Y fully in physical terms without any appeal to any sort of mental intentional term at all. Now, could there means that ideally with a completed science. It does not mean that right now we can do it. Nonetheless, Gilbert-Ryle says we have to think about mental properties this way, otherwise we fall into the trap of thinking about a ghost in the machine. The mind is this queer sort of immaterial thing which causes changes in material things. That is nonsense. Nonsense on one hand, really hard science that we don't understand on the other. It's better off to opt for the really hard science we don't understand. Now, Ryle says one way that people fall into this trap of thinking about a ghost in the machine is to think of all knowledge as propositional, as involving propositions, as being statable in sentences. I know that today is Monday. That's propositional knowledge. That's a bit of know that. However, I also know how to make a peanut butter sandwich. Now, maybe making a peanut butter sandwich could be expressed in terms of know that, in terms of sentences, propositions. It says something like, well, and you see this in approaches to AI, older approaches to artificial intelligence with production sheets, to give production sheets, which are a nested list of if-then statements. If certain thing is the current situation, then perform Y. If something else is the situation, then perform Z, and so on. For really simple tasks, maybe production sheets work. Maybe we can say how to do something by saying that you ought to believe X or Y. Now, even for making a peanut butter sandwich, it can be very complicated. It would say something like, if you want a peanut butter sandwich, then get bread, peanut butter, sandwich, knife. Then if you have bread, peanut butter, sandwich, knife, open the peanut butter. What if the peanut butter doesn't have a lid? Well, then we have to build in all the possibilities. What if I don't have bread? Well, then I have to build in a possibility of going to the store and getting the bread. So even for something like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich becomes very complicated to express know-how, the ability, the competency, the disposition in terms of know that. And Ryle says it is not possible for us here now. It's too complicated. Now, this is oftentimes seen as a problem for artificial intelligence because all we can do to computers are program them with propositions represented in a certain way. We can give them lots of sentences that say, if such is the case, then do such and such process. But if intelligence, mental activity, mental properties are really know-how and not know that, then can we ever create an intelligent computer with a mind. So you can think about things that we can do that are intelligent. We can further separate this idea of know how from know that. So if I were to throw a baseball to you right now, if I were to throw it up in the air, sort of pop fly sort of thing, most all of you would be able to catch that ball with a very high probability. We can all do this. But to express how this is done in terms of sentences is vastly, overwhelmingly complicated. There's all kinds of complicated math involved that likely you've never studied. Has to do with the angle, the speed of the ball, the effects of the wind, the light involved, changes in the light, movement to shadow, the movement of my body in a gross manner to get under the ball, in a fine manner to position my arm and my hand, timing issues to close my hand at just the right point. If I were to give you a list of sentences of how to catch a fly ball for any given fly ball, that would be incredibly complicated. But fly balls vary in infinite ways with speed, height, angle, and so on. So I would have to give you complete knowledge of all the math involved. You would have to sit down and study and study and study. And now we can think of someone who has studied all the relevant math. Now this is an ideal person. They sat down and they studied all of the math involved. And then they come out and they say, look, I know all of the bits of proposition involved in catching a fly ball. Let them loose in the field, and likely they don't catch the fly ball at all because they don't have the competency. They don't have the know-how. Maybe they trip and they fall. Maybe it takes too long to run through all the propositions to actually catch the ball. So there's a separation between propositional knowledge on one hand and know-how on the other. Now Rawls says this plays into this whole myth of the ghost in the machine. When people think, well, I sat down to enroll in the course, I had a series of orders in my head that said, I want to enroll in the course. Enrolling in the course requires I sit down at the computer, therefore I'm going to sit down at the computer. There's two acts going on, he says. When I sit down at the computer, there's a mental act and there's a physical act. And he says, no, mental acts just are the performance of physical acts. They're a competency. It's not that my mind has a list of orders in it that then cause me to do things. If that were the case, then we have a big problem. We have an infinite regress because I have a list of orders in my mind. I then have to know how to interpret those orders, which requires me to have a list of orders, a list of procedures about how to interpret the first list of procedures. But then, in order to have that second list of procedures, I have to have a list of procedures of how to produce those and how to interpret them, and I get an infinite regress. Now, Rawls' position may be that these bits, these mental competencies we have, these intelligence, wittiness, emotion, anger, these things, even though they are dispositions to act, their physical properties, maybe we cannot reduce them, either because of a matter of fact with our current science, or even ideally we cannot reduce them because they're infinite, infinitely complicated. Intentionality we saw with the property dualist was supposed to be a feature of mental properties, not had by physical properties. This is something had by mental properties, and therefore mental properties are something different than physical properties, and therefore not reducible to physical properties. So if know how is not reducible to know that, then how is it not the case that we have a ghost in the machine? There is something that cannot be expressed mechanically, physically. Now, back to the consideration of AI, we have this issue. Well, we may not be able to program in know how except by way of know that. Now, we've got very complicated computers that can beat the best chess players. But everything that goes on there is a list of know that. The question is that if we could ever get enough propositions listed in a computer, enough things it could do, would it be able to be intelligent? Would it have a mind? Or is the mind, something with a mind has something additional beyond the physical? Related to this are concerns over the frame problem, how we go about framing a situation. When we look at a picture, we can tell what is the foreground and what is the background. We frame it a certain way. We frame a situation a certain way by picking out the things that are important. This is required for every task we do. Walking across the street, if you could not tell what's important to this task and what is not, you would not be very successful at crossing the street. It's oftentimes been claimed that artificial intelligent computers cannot solve the frame problem. You may have seen, in fact, I'm sure you've seen, something like this. You go to sign up for a website and you're asked to put in the word that's included, and there are squiggles over the word, there are dots over the word, etc. These are called CAPTCHA. CAPTCHA, completely automated program to tell the difference between computers. Completely automated program to tell the difference, to tell computers and humans apart. CAPTCHA. The point is that a computer could get on there, sign up for an email address, and then issue out a bunch of spam. If we can limit access to only humans, then it's going to be much more difficult to sign up for things en masse and spam or enter a bunch of contests mechanically computer. This turns on the idea of the frame problem. We can look, because we have minds, at what is foreground and background, what is relevant to the task and what is not. We can see what needs to be input as the words, as the letters, as the numbers. We can succeed at that task, computers cannot. Now the problem is, this turns on the whole idea that we can solve the frame problem, that we have a bit of know-how that cannot be expressed as know-that, but computers get better and better at reading these things, and so the CAPTCHAs themselves become more and more complicated. Now if there is a CAPTCHA that humans can solve and computers cannot, never can, then there's something about humans that cannot be reduced to the physical. There's some sort of a ghost in the machine. Now, we move on to Skinner. Skinner's a behaviorist. May not be entirely clear what his position is. He may not even have a consistent position. But we can talk about methodological behaviorism, which says that, well, first, it's somewhat non-commental about the ontological question, whether there is mind or not, as something different than body. But it's clear on the epistemological point. It says that the right way to go about studying mind is by studying the body. So here we have two other possible combinations of the ontological epistemological question. Either we take the line that there is nothing mental beyond the physical, there is only body, there is no mind, the ontological answer. The epistemological answer is we ought to go about studying mind as a physical thing, physically. We look only at behaviors. What happened physically beforehand, what happened physically after, that explains the causation. We can explain the presence of that causal relationship by past behaviors or by the influence of the physical environment on the physical entity that produced that behavior, right? This is conditioning. Regardless of whether the methodological behaviorist believes there is mind as something mental or only mind as something physical, the answer to the epistemological question is that we ought to study only physical behavior. This gets around all kinds of confusions. This gets around the spooky non-explanation of the appeal to something mental. It's easy to say, well, why did he do that? He did that because he was angry. But if we can't cash out what that mental thing is, that anger, in some sort of physical term, it just stops the conversation altogether. We're done. We've given an explanation. But if we think that the mind just is body, then we haven't really given an explanation at all. get around all that by studying only the physical. Beyond methodological behaviorism, we get radical behaviorism. Radical behaviorism does make the ontological claim that there is nothing mental, there is only the physical. It allows us to introspect, to think, sit down like Descartes did and think about the nature of our mind, think about the current status of our body. We can use that sort of mental investigation of ourselves, not of others, because we don't have access to the mental activities of others. That's a complication. It's one motivation for methodological behaviorism. Since I can't access what's going on with you mentally, in order to predict your behavior, in order to explain your behavior, I ought to look only at your behavior. Radical behaviorism says there is nothing but the body. The mind just is the body, or a certain part of the body. We can introspect, but introspection is like going about studying the body in a very indirect way. It's like studying me by studying my shadow. It's methodologically a bad idea. So here we have the answer to the ontological question. There is no mind distinct from body. It's not a mental substance. There's only physical substance. The epistemological question, we ought to go about studying that mental substance as a physical substance, as a physical substance. The mind just is a physical substance. We go about studying mind by studying physical substance. Now here, part of what we get with radical behaviorism is to say that the intentional properties cited by the property dualist last time really are not anything special had by mental property, by the mind. They just are a kind of physical property. Thinking about them as mental properties, maybe with Ryle, confuses us, makes a category mistake, or maybe with Skinner, it's just a really bad method. It's like measuring the distance between here and the moon with a ruler. It's just not a good method. But mental properties are not something distinct from, of a different sort than physical properties. If this is true, it seems to get rid of lots of things. Well, what is love? There's no such thing as love anymore. What is freedom? Don't we have freedom? But doesn't freedom require me to think something and then act on that something? If my action is not caused by what I'm thinking, if my thought is epiphenomenal, then some physical state of me caused my action. And that seems to get rid of freedom. All the intentional concepts are thrown out. There is no such thing as an intentional concept except as a way of describing, in a very poor way, something physical. Finally, we get Dennett. Dennett comes in and he says, look, there's all kinds of problems in Skinner, and he's pretty harsh on Skinner. He says that Skinner thinks he's doing all kinds of things that he's really not doing at all. Skinner comes in and he says, look, there's this computer that can play chess. This is Dennett's account of Skinner, right? There's this computer that can play chess. We might look at it and say that computer is intelligent, but no, it's not intelligent at all. It can't play chess. All it can do is follow a certain list of rules. But really, it can't follow a certain list of rules either. All it can do is mathematics. But really, it can't do mathematics either. All it can do is addition really quickly. But it can't do addition either. Really, all it is are electrical impulses expressed in a circuit board. All it is a physical thing inside my computer that manifests itself in a certain way. I can explain what the computer is going to do by looking at its physical state, understanding its programming. And that programming, of course, was expressed physically at some point in some manner. Now, Dennett says, well, look, Skinner thinks that this is the way to do it and that this is methodologically a good idea. And he says, well, I'll give Skinner the computer. I'll explain to him computer programming. He can understand, he can study the computer at its initial state. He can study the computer at a later state after the computer has updated itself and now plays chess in a different way. Skinner likely is going to be really bad at playing chess if that is all he's basing it on. If he sits down and it's the computer's turn or it's Skinner's turn and he's trying to anticipate what the computer is going to do, he has to go through and access all this information. And it's going to be, at very least, cumbersome. Likely it's not going to work at all. You have someone else who doesn't know anything even about computers at all. Sits down, sees the computer move, goes to take her turn and thinks, the computer thinks I'm going to do such and such, therefore I ought to do this other thing. If I make this move, it will threaten the computer into doing such and such. Now what we're doing here is applying intentional properties to the computer. The computer is not threatened. It does not feel threat. It does not anticipate anything. Right? But then it says that we ought to do this. That we ought to take the intentional stance. That we do this all the time. Not just with people, but with pets, the dog. The dog is over by the water bowl because the dog wants water. By saying want, we give it an intentional property. We give the dog an intentional property that is a mental property, a mind. But maybe the dog doesn't have a mind at all. Maybe humans don't have a mind at all. All they are physical conglomerations. Moreover, we do this with computers. My computer keeps crashing. My computer hates me. Why is my computer doing this? What is its motivation? What is my computer thinking? Why does my computer suck? These are intentional things I'm putting on the computer. Now, this might just be a habit of us. It might be a bad idea, methodologically, says Skinner. It might be damaging because it commits a category mistake that prevents us from understanding the nature of mind, with Ryle. But Dennis says we do this with all kinds of things. I know what's going to happen with my air conditioner because I think that it is going to turn on at a given point, given the temperature in the house. I can attribute an intentionality to even thermostats. And usually when we describe activity of anything, sometimes an intentional term sneaks in. Skinner thinks that we can get rid of all of this and just talk about the physical state of things, and reductionists think this. And they might even think that we have good reason to do it, either because it's true, or because it gets us away from other errors, or because it's methodologically useful. Dennis says, no, this is nonsense. Think about how complicated these dispositions are, and to put them into physical terms and all the possible physical states that could lead to all the possible physical actions, this is overwhelming. This is intractable. We can't do it. Rather, it's a really good idea to posit a mind on other people, on pets, on objects that helps us anticipate, predict, and explain their behavior. This is to take the intentional stance, says Dennis. Now, curiously, this is our final possible combination of the epistemological and ontological answer. Dennis says there is nothing mental beyond the physical. It is all reducible to the physical, ideally. Currently, we can't do it because it's too complicated. Moreover, it's a really bad idea to do it because it's too complicated. So even though there is no such thing as mind, as a mental thing separate from body, we ought to go about studying the mind, predicting the behavior of others by way of thinking of the mind. There is only body, but we ought to study mind as body by studying mind. Say again, ontologically, mind is nothing but body, but we ought to go about studying this thing, this physical thing we call the mind, by thinking of it mentally as something other than something physical. There's nothing but the physical, but we ought to think about it as something other than the physical. Now this makes somewhat messy the AI question. There's the ontological AI question. Is it possible that there is some physical thing, a computer that is intelligent, has a mind? Dennett would say yes, but more so Dennett would say even before we get to that point, we ought to think of the computer as having a mind because it helps us better predict the performance of the computer. Now this distinction between ontology and epistemology, thinking in terms of the ontological question to anything we're studying, the nature of the mind, the nature of mental operation, action, causation, and also the epistemological question, how we ought to go about thinking about it, what's useful, what's possible, how can we know about it, how ought we go about knowing about it. These are going to be things important to us throughout the semester. Now this week I did not receive anybody sending me a question about content of the readings of the lecture. I'm supposed to have a question of the week here sent to me by one of you. I do not have that. Next week, hopefully I will have, which means you need to send me questions about the reading, about the video content I just posted. You want to know more about a term? You want me to explain something differently? You don't understand something? Send me that question. I'll choose one of them. I'll post an answer to that next week. Let me know if there's any problems through the week.